Hola, buenas tardes. Vamos a dar comienzo a
We're going to
esta
begin
conferencia
this
sobre las mujeres árabes en una década de transformaciones
event
en el
on
marco de este Foro
Arab women
Internacional de 2
during a
días
decade
sobre
of
una década de
transformations in this
transformaciones
two-day
en el mundo árabe.
seminar
He de
on a
disculpar
decade of
la ausencia de
transformations
Fatemah
in the Arab
Farag, que
world.
no ha
I need to
podido,
excuse Fatemah Farag,
asistir, y en
who
su
has
lugar
not been able to come,
está con
and
nosotros
in
Zulitha
her stead
Bouabdia,
is Zulitha,
junto a Madawi
who
al-Rasheed
together
y
with
Hibaaq
Madawi
Osman.
al-Rasheed and
Empezaremos
Hibaaq
con
Osman.
Madawi
We will
al-Rasheed.
start with
Es
Madawi
profesora visitante
al-Rasheed.
en el Centro
She's
de
a
Oriente Medio de la
visiting
London School of
professor
Economics.
at the
Anteriormente
Middle
fue
East
profesora de
College
Antropología
at the London
Social en
School
el
of
King's College de
Economics.
Londres y profesora
She
visitante
was
en el
also in
Middle
the
East
Department
Institute de la Universidad
of
Nacional de
Theology and
Singapur.
Religious Studies in
Sus
King's College in
investigaciones se
London.
centran sobre todo en
And
la historia,
she
la sociedad,
bases
la
her
religión y
research
la
on
política en Arabia
history,
Saudí y el
society
Golfo,
and
las
religion and
minorías
politics
cristianas de
in
Oriente Medio en Gran Bretaña, la
Saudi
migración árabe,
Arabia and the
los
Gulf,
movimientos islamistas,
the
las relaciones
Islamist
de Estado de
movements,
género y el modernismo
state and gender,
islámico.
and
Tiene diversas
Islamic
publicaciones sobre
modernity.
estos
She has
temas.
several
Hibaaq
publications
Osman
on the
es la
matter.
fundadora
Hibaaq
de Karama,
Osman
una
is
organización
the
que
founder
desde
of
hace
Karama,
más de 12 años
an
trabaja para poner
organization that
fin a
has
la
been
violencia
working
contra las
to put
mujeres
an end
y
to violence
ofrecer paz
against
y
women for
democracia
over 12
sostenibles
years
e
and
inclusivas en la
to
región
offer
árabe.
peace and
El
democracy that
principio
are
rector de
sustainable and
Karama o los
inclusive in
principios
the
son
Arab
asegurar
region.
que las estrategias que
The
afectan a
guiding
las
principle of
mujeres
Karama is to
de la
guarantee
región
that
no
the
solo
strategies
responden
that
a las
affect
necesidades de las mujeres sobre el
women
terreno,
does not only
sino que están
respond to women,
dirigidas
to
por
need to women
mujeres
on the
y
ground, but
verdaderos
that
representantes de la comunidad.
address
El objetivo
women and
finalmente es situar a las mujeres
the
en la región árabe en
representatives
el centro de la
of the
respuesta
community.
humanitaria
The
de la
aim
prevención
is
y
to
resolución
place
de
the women in
conflictos.
the Arab region at the center
Ha sido nombrada
of the
uno de los 500
humanitarian
musulmanes
response of
más
conflict
influyentes
resolution and
y ha sido
prevention
también miembro
and
de
promoting
diferentes grupos
the
dentro
role of
de
women
Naciones
in
Unidas.
public life. She's one of the
Zulitha
500
Bouabdia nació
most
en Moscú,
influent
creció en Argel y
of
se trasladó a Francia
Muslims in the
en
world. She's also worked
1993,
for
donde se graduó
the
en Bellas
UN
Artes en la
and
Escuela Nacional
a
Superior
donor of
de
direct
Artes
action.
en 2002. Sus obras de instalación,
Her
dibujo, vídeo y
installations
fotografía versan sobre los efectos de la globalización y cuestionan sus representaciones con humor y subversión. En 2003 dirigió en este
her
sentido el vídeo
installations
en el
use
que fusiona
drawings,
los
video, and
arquetipos de
photography
las
and look at the
culturas
effects
francesas
of
y argelina,
globalization and
realizando una
question
danza
its
del vientre
representations with
con la
humor.
melodía de la marsellesa.
And
Desde
in
2007 sus
2003,
obras
she directed the
han sido
video Let's
expuestas
Dance, and
en
since
diferentes
2007, her work
diferentes
has been
museos como el
shown
Centro
at
Georges
different
Pompidou o el Museo Árabe
museums, such as the
Matxaf de
Georges
Arte Moderno de
Pompidou
Doha
Center,
y
the
particularmente versan sobre
Arab
el
Mataf
estatus
Museum
de las mujeres.
of Modern Art in
Hemos
Doha, and the
organizado un
Ludwig
poco esta
Foundation
charla
of the Modern Art Museum in Vienna, and
primero
so on.
una
We've
introducción de
organized
cada una de ellas de unos
this
5
talk
minutos.
with each of them,
Después podemos
each of our
empezar el debate. Lo
speakers
empezaré yo quizá con un par de
making some
preguntas
introductory
hacia ellas
remarks for
y luego
approximately
me
5
gustaría
minutes.
que participasen ustedes
Then
también con sus propias preguntas para
I
que no
will
sea
ask
solo
them
un debate
questions,
entre
and then I would
nosotras,
like at the
sino
very end
que
the public
participen
to ask
ustedes
questions
también.
as well.
Empieza Madawi al-Rasheed.
Madawi al-Rasheed has the floor first.
I'm happy to be with you, sharing my research and also my views on, I wouldn't like to say Arab women because I don't want to single them out as a category. In my view, Arab women, like men in the region, they have serious issues. One of them is obviously security. But as women, they also have a kind of double discrimination. As citizens, they suffer from the same restrictions, the same marginalization, and the lack of opportunities that Arab men also have. But also as women, they have a specific status, and this status is not universal, it's not the same across the Arab world. In my research, I find that it is really important not to think of Arab women as a homogeneous mass. Arab women are fragmented into class, ethnicity, they have different education, they experience systems of marginalization and discrimination in different ways, depending on where they stand. And I will illustrate this by giving some examples. Second question I would like to ask is, according to some objective criteria, there are certain discrimination against women in this particular region. The discrimination is acute in some countries, and in other countries we find that they have overcome several obstacles to being integrated as full citizens. So there is a spectrum in terms of their relationship to citizenship, relationship to economic resources, educational resources, and also basically their presence in the public sphere. We have a spectrum from the most restricted in countries, for example, Saudi Arabia, to other places where they have gained rights. And I would probably say that in Tunisia, perhaps, and in Morocco, they have achieved quite a lot of rights that are still denied in Saudi Arabia. But we don't want to stereotype these countries. We don't want to see Arab women as victims of their system of culture and religion. But at the same time, I am hesitant to see Arab women as survivors or heroes. There are several narratives that had become extremely dominant in the public sphere, in certain circles, among policymakers, even among Arabs themselves. The first narrative is that they try to explain why there is this discrimination. So there are two reasons often given to explain why Arab women are lagging behind in certain rights, not in terms of their education, because in a country like Saudi Arabia, we find that they have actually they overtaken men in terms of their education. But in terms of their rights, they are still behind. One silly explanation relates to Islam. We have heard in policy circles, in the media, that all this is related to Islam, because Islam allows men to marry 4 women. Islam gives women half the inheritance of their brothers when their fathers die. So there is an attempt to explain this marginalization of women and the less rights they have in terms of religion. The second explanation tries to think or locate the problem in culture. And I call this the acculturation problem, which means that, Arab women are lagging behind because they are conservative, tribal societies. They are really not accepting women as full citizens. So these two arguments are problematic as far as I can see. And I wanted to investigate these kind of claims. And I did my research on Saudi women and published a book called A Most Masculine State. And I found that neither Islam nor culture are sufficient to explain the lack of full citizenship among women in Saudi Arabia and, in fact, across the Arab world. It is actually the state, the government, and its alliance with certain constituencies in society that lead to the discrimination against women. So I wanted to investigate that and look at how this really ambiguous relationship has an impact on Saudi women. In the news, you always hear that Saudi women are not allowed to drive. And it is actually the only Muslim country where women are not allowed to drive. But for me, driving is a symptom of a deep problem And also, driving is not the demand of all women in Saudi Arabia. During my research, I actually came across women who say, the question for me is not whether I can drive. The question for me is whether I can afford a car. And this is really interesting in a country that is one of the wealthiest in the Arab world. So we have to be more careful by just sort of picking on one issue. Driving has become symbolic, and driving is extremely important for a specific category of women, mainly working women. And not all Saudi Arabia women are working. Women in Saudi Arabia do not make 20% of the labor force. If they work, most of their jobs are actually in the teaching profession, in education. And those women are the ones who need a car. They need to be able to drive a car. But the other women may not actually find it important. They have other concerns. So another concern is you may have heard of the guardianship system. What does it mean? Guardianship system means that a woman cannot leave the country, cannot go to a hospital, cannot have an operation, cannot study at university, cannot get a job, and the list is long. All these are dependent on the approval of her male guardian. So women do not have a legal personality. They have to have the permission of a male guardian. So who suffers from this? Women who do not have a male guardian. Imagine a widow or a divorcee whose parents are dead. Sometimes her guardian will be her teenage son, and this causes problems for women. So Saudi women have been campaigning for quite a long time to change the system, to lift and abolish the guardianship system. And the government has been reluctant to do that because it does not want to upset certain constituencies, certain conservative elements in society, because it needs those people to support it, especially at times of crisis and at times of serious mobilization across the Arab world. And this happened since 2010. So the government needs the support of those conservative elements, and therefore there is a kind of, it's like a chorus, a musical chorus. They all play the same game together, support each other in order to, and the result is keeping women under these kind of restrictive regimes. So I'm happy to answer your questions if you have any on Saudi Arabia or on what I have said now.
Okay, now Zuliha Wabel.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's very difficult for me to how to say as I'm a visual artist. That's what I do, and of course I can't give you like a talk precisely about the situation of women in the Arab world, but I can try to talk about my experience and my vision of what does it mean being a woman in the Arab world through, that's something actually that I try to express through my work. So I'm gonna just put on the screen my last video that I shot in Casablanca called Men on off the Beach. So I hope I'm gonna be able, if I do escape, and then, I don't know yet, it doesn't change anything. So they can find a solution. So I was born in Moscow, but quickly, with my parents, we get back in Algeria. So I grew up in Algeria, and I witnessed a very important and tragical social movement in the 80s. And it was actually one of the first demonstration of society that wanted a new to give up with the regime, you know, with the unique regime, the regime of a unique party that we had in Algeria. So, yeah, yes, I see it. There is no sound. It's a video installation. So, so then I moved to, so I grew up then in Algiers, and I witnessed it very young. I mean, I was very young, that the movement of young people can really change things, you know. The situation in Algeria, it's not that good in democratic point of view, but still this movement of October 88 allowed, they stopped the politic of the unique party, and we had election, and we had the emergence of different, comment dire, different parties. So it was one step to the democracy. Even the situation, it's not as good as we wish. So this is important from the eyes of a young woman, because I felt that to get freedom, to get things changed, we have to fight. This is really the first conclusion I get very early as a woman. And I had the chance to have a mother. She used to bring me with her each 8 March, which is the Women International Day to reclaim women's rights. So that was too very important, you know, because I understood very early that to get to a better situation, to get to change things, we need to fight. This is, I mean, the first lesson I get as a young woman. Then I moved to France, and there it was a completely different perspective of view that I had, because I came as a young Algerian, a young woman who wanted to study art in France. And France seems to me like the country of freedom, of civil rights, and you know, when you can express yourself and so on, and you know about the history of France and the human rights. And then I find out that being a woman coming from the Arab world, and especially from Algeria, because I think that you know the history between Algeria and France, then that it cannot be neutral being a woman, an Arab woman from a Muslim Arab world. It cannot be neutral being living in a Western society, and especially in my case in France. So I understood very quickly that I have to deal with it, and this is something that I cannot, you know, put out from myself, you know, that I have to deal with it. I have to accept it, and I have to actually not explain myself, but to redefine myself, you know, from this perspective. So then I start with doing kind of, comment dire, kind of an action with the video that Pilar talked to you about, called Dansons, when you can see a very close frame with my belly wearing 3 scarves with 3 colors, which is blue, red, and white, It's represented the French flag, the tricolor flag, and it symbolizes freedom, equality, and fraternity, brother. Fraternity, okay. It's easier than I thought. So sorry, excuse me, because my English is not that good. Usually speak in French and not really that much in Arabic. It was for me in action to say that, okay, listen, even if I'm not from France, even if I'm foreign, from this country, these three words mean something to me. I can understand them and I can deal with them. And this, it's not only French inspiration, it's an inspiration from anyone from anywhere from the world. And I start to, with when I wore those three scarves, I start to dance on the tune of the Marseillaise. And it was kind of saying, okay, I don't only dance with, I don't only understand what does it mean, those three words, the meaning of those three words, but I only can dance with it. And I'm very kind of, comment dire, apaisée. I feel comfortable with it, you know. So that was the first, actually, video, an artwork I made, and it was quickly shown in France at the Centre Pompidou. And I had a really different reaction. And I find it very interesting that this video can really, people really received in a positive way. I mean, French spectators, viewers, they really see it in a positive way, but the others really didn't like it. Like, you are playing with our symbolic, you know, you are not allowed to touch those three symbolics. And actually, I was very happy about that, because that was my point. That's saying, okay, an inspiration to make things change, an inspiration to modernism. It's not something that the Western hold, you know. It's an inspiration from anyone, from anywhere in the world. So then, after this years in France, I went to live in Casablanca, in Morocco, and that was very interesting, because I have actually to deal with another way to be a woman, Muslim woman now in the Arab world. It's not the same thing, because I felt like in Morocco, really how to deal with being a woman. It's actually a fight. It's a fight of every day, you know. But because we have to deal with many situations that actually Madawi were talking about. We have to deal with the question of religion, of patriarchal, explain what does it mean feminism, and so on, so and so. So I start to think about the question of feminism. So I get to this conclusion that feminism, it's not only it's not only the concern of women, it's a concern of men too. And it's very dangerous, in my opinion, coming from the Western side, that to talk about feminism, giving a speech against the men, you know, in Arab world. me in Morocco, I really met I was very actually surprised, because it's not the speech that we hear in the Western world. But when I get back to the Arab world, living in Morocco, for example, I find out that there is a lot of men who are fighting too for women's rights. And I find it very interesting to bring this support, you know, to the discussion about women's rights. That's why I wanted to do this video that you were watching behind me. It's a video of men playing football on public space, which is the beach. And in Morocco, the sea, it's in Casablanca, the sea, it's in the west side. So that's why you have this kind of light with contrast, and you can only see silhouettes. And what I want to say, that in this public space, even here you see it's a male space or space invested by male. It doesn't mean that it's not a space allowed to women to go in. The proof, it's me who is filming there. They accepted me. They are very happy to have me there, and they know that I'm shooting, because of course I went there many times. So they get used to me, and each time I go there, they were very happy to see me, and they were even more showing them virilité, and showing they are, you know, handsome and masculinity, and yes. So, but I want to give give a tribute to them, saying, like, look, they are young, they are healthy, they are handsome, they have all the future in front of them, because they are young, but they still stuck in this space, you know, and this space is end with the line of horizon. It's the other side, you know, and I find it that yeah, actually this video is a tribute to men who are fighting too, that the situation has to change, and that we need equality, women and men together, and we have to fight for it together. So that's what I want to say about my experience as a woman in the Arab world. Sorry.
Today, you know, we're here discussing the Arab region and the lessons we can learn from the last 10 years. I think the strikest lesson that I can put before you today comes from a report published by the UNDP last year. It is a warning to us for what might happen if we do not learn the lessons of recent years. Simply put, if current trends continue, in 30 years' time, 3 out of 4 people living in the Arab region will be living in conflict. From civil war to occupation to instability, the Arab region already experiences a huge disproportionate level of violence. Though though home to just 5% of the global population between 1989 and 2014, over a quarter of the world's battle deaths occurred in the region, while it hosts nearly 60% of the world's refugees. War and instability represent the greatest threat to the region's development and to the advancement of women's rights in particular. Whether it is access to food, education, sanitation, and so on, conflict damages measure of progress and throws many into reverse. It destroys people's health and livelihoods, the institutions and infrastructure essential to improvement. And as we see in so many parts of the region, the chaos created by the conflict presents opportunities for armed groups who would turn back the clock on every bit of progress women have made in society. Let's look at education, the key to a country's future and essential to development. It's also a crucial indicator for the value that a society places on women. the opportunities that it will provide for women, the scope that women have to make their own independent decisions. In Yemen, for example, the adult literacy rate for men is 85%, while for women it's just 55%. Already then, a huge structural inequality exists for women. When we consider that countries experiencing conflict can expect school enrollment to drop by 1/5, clearly it will be ever more difficult to address the problems as the almost forgotten war in Yemen continues. Conflict also marginalizes women or freezes them out of entirely from political and diplomatic processes. A study of 31 major peace processes between 1992 and 2011 found that just 2% of the chief mediators and 9% of negotiators involved were women. What is the result of not including women in these processes? Peace deals that simply do not take into account the experiences and needs of women post-conflict. In order to deal with the aftermath of conflict, it's essential to recognize that though men are more likely to die in battle, far more women than men die from the indirect effects of conflict. Women are more likely to be victims of sexual and gender-based violence and more likely to become displaced by conflict. Any peace deal that does not recognize these issues will mean that women will continue to suffer, even when peace is declared. To add this, when women have been excluded from the peace processes, it becomes far too easy to go on excluding them from political processes that follows. When just 18% of legislators in the region are women, we are already in a precarious situation. We cannot afford to allow women to be marginalized even further. Peace and security are then absolutely fundamental conditions if we want to build sustainable improvements for the lives of women. As activists based in the region, we see a lot of well-intentioned but not well-thought-out campaigns, often led by Western NGOs, that seek to address discrete problems in countries affected by conflict. You cannot pick a single issue that are driven by conflict, one at a time, and expect sustainable change. To ignore conflict as the root cause while dealing with its symptoms would be like firefighters concentrating all their efforts on a single room of a burning building while the rest of the structure collapses around them. Even where an issue does not immediately appear to be caused by conflict, FGM, female genital mutilation in Yemen, or child marriage, among displaced populations, say we can see that it is conflict that propels the underlying cultural and social drivers of these problems. I started by quoting the UNDP's own warning about the trend of increasing conflict in the Arab region, but I'm afraid that their own targets do not fully recognize threats posed by conflict. The development agenda is now dominated by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This set the targets for a world without poverty, without hunger, with affordable and clean energy. Only one of the SDGs discusses the need to promote peace. This is a fundamental problem with the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and we only have to look at the current situation in the Arab region and Africa for the evidence. The gravest threats currently facing the Middle East and Africa, the potential famines in Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia, and Nigeria, have their roots directly in conflict. While the world must act, and act now, to relieve desperate people in these countries with humanitarian support, if we are to deal with food insecurities in long term, then we must prioritize peace and security. If we are serious about building a world without poverty, without hunger, with gender equality and all of the 14 SDGs achieved, then we must conceive of a world without conflict. This must be our starting point and not simply one consideration among others. At a discussion last month at the Commission on the Status of Women on Promoting Women's Economic Participation and Promoting Rights, colleagues from Palestine put it very simply: under occupation, there is no development. The same is true for development in conflict. The uncertainty, the indignity of life lived in fear, the brutality of everyday violence, all of this means that any progress cannot be resilient. It is not sustainable. As a Somali, I can tell you personally that this is not just the lesson of the last 10 years, but the lesson of the last 20 to 30 years. When we hear that our current path leads us to a world in which 75% of the people in the Arab region live under conflict, then we must learn that lesson. There are many things that we can learn, that we can do to make peace and security our priority. And seeing as I am in Europe, there is something I can tell you as EU citizens and EU voters. Militarization is one of the greatest threats to peace that we experience in the Arab region. Military spending by Arab states is 65% higher than the global average. For every dollar that the Sudanese government spends on healthcare, it spends $70 on its military. This is an issue that we raise in the region, where the decisions are made. But it's also an issue that we ask to raise here, because it's primarily countries in the West that profit from the global arms trade. I ask you to ask your governments, are you putting profits over peace? What kind of security policy are you pursuing when Western-made bullets, guns, and explosives are found in the hands of ISIS? We must stem the flow of weapons into the region, and that is something that you should be raising and doing, because we are always looking, you know, Arabs and Africans have a problem, there is a war, but we never mirror ourselves and ask, where is my taxpayers? What, have I been part of buying the weapons, you know, and giving it to irresponsible governments that are turning it against its own people? So I think each one of us, of you who are Europeans and voting, I think this is what you need to ask when you are really electing, you know, your policy makers. And the other thing that you should be concerned is the populist movements and what they are doing. So I would basically leave that we are interdependent. If we don't have security in the Arab region, you will not have a security in Europe. And this is something that you should really think.
Gracias, Hibaaq. Antes de dar el paso al público, me gustaría preguntar, hemos visto un poco desde Madawi que ha hecho una exposición más general diciendo
the
que
Q&A.
los problemas son generales,
Let me ask you a couple of
pero
questions.
sus especificidades
Madawi has told us that problems are general, of a general nature, but then there are specificities, and she gave us an example. Saudi Arabia, apparently it's the most repressive country from our perspective, but maybe we also are prejudiced. And when approaching the issues of Arab women from, you know, when looking at them from this side, then Suliha spoke about her personal experience, and then Hibaaq told us about the insecurity, the lack of women in conflict. But also, to what extent we are somehow responsible and accountable for that particular situation, and this making women victims in this whole scenario. Now we're speaking about transformations in the Arab world. So in general, I'd like to ask you the following. Do you think that in this past decade of transformations, has the situation of women improved, or has it gone the opposite way? With the exception of Tunisia, maybe where the outcome of those transformations was not what we expected or what we would have wanted. But as Hibaaq said, this is really being particularly difficult for women. So has the situation improved, or has it gotten worse?
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think what happened in the Arab world, if you are referring to 2010, 2011, that we today call the Arab uprisings, Arab revolutions, or even Arab Spring, I think that is not a sudden event, although it took so many people by surprise. There is a historical process building up for years. The Arab world looked like a pressure cooker. If you are booking your holiday in 2010 to go to Tunisia and lie on the beach, you're only going to see the latest holiday resort. It's cheap, package, you just they ship you on these planes, you arrive in Hammamat or in Casablanca, or of course you will not go to Saudi Arabia unless you are going on a pilgrimage. And then, even then, you have to be part of a quota system. So you go and you enjoy the sunshine and the food, and you buy some objects from the local market, and you are impressed by sunshine and the facilities at the hotel, etc. You come back and you think, oh, this is really great. But this facade of consumption, of mass tourism, concealed fundamental issues that Tunisia, as much as Morocco, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, were facing. And the facade covered serious poverty, serious discrimination, certain brutality that was taking place. You, as a tourist or a visitor, you were sheltered from that brutality. You are treated differently. You are treated with respect in the majority of cases because you're bringing your foreign money, your foreign currency, looking at these beautiful real estate holiday resorts. But the reality was different. The reality was really different. There were people who were struggling to change the situation. So the last 10 years, we have seen greater mobilization, but that built on several decades of women and men paying very high price for facing really rigid authoritarian rulers. When we are talking about women themselves, maybe they acquired more visibility after 2010, 2011. Because and also the women themselves challenged our stereotypes here in the West, because we are always told that these Arab women or Muslim women are either subservient, discriminated against, poor thing, you know. And there was a lot of Orientalist images of these women. They are veiled. If they are veiled, it means that their father or mother or brother had forced them to veil. They were presented as lacking agency. They are presented as helpless people who are just sort of bossed around. And when 2010, 2011 happened, they were in public squares with men. Whether they are veiled or not veiled, we saw them come in great numbers. And some people, I hope, in the West, did change their perception of these women. So what I think the last year has brought about is greater visibility and also the challenges of visibility. So perhaps we had more sexual harassment in the public squares. We had more violence against women as part of regime intimidation, or even some sectors of society's intimidation of women. So women are suddenly projected as part of that society, and their image did change. In fact, in terms of their situation also, they are more vocal, I would say. Even in a country like Saudi Arabia, the Arab uprising gave them hope, and today most of their activism takes place on social media. And it's a very difficult situation. I do not want to make you believe that, you know, if you use Facebook and Twitter, we are going to achieve our rights. It doesn't come like that. It's just more complicated. So women had been launching campaigns to drive online. They have written petitions online. They have demanded lifting the ban on driving or on the guardianship system. Also, there were elections in 2005. They are very minor elections at the municipal level. Women were excluded in Saudi Arabia as voters and candidates. But in 2015, they were allowed to participate. Okay, it's a symbolic gesture. It is not a democratic process. Saudi Arabia is the only country now in the Arab world that doesn't have some kind of elected national assembly. But that's another question. But they campaigned, there was a campaign called Baladi campaign, My Country campaign, and Saudi women campaigned to be included in the elections, although these elections were very, very, very minor. But at least they got to participate in 2015. So these campaigns are important. But if women campaign to drive and they say on this particular day we want to drive, we find it is very difficult for groups of women to go and drive. You have maybe a small number, like 5 here, 10 there, and they are picked up by the police and put in jail because there is serious intimidation of women. But I just want to comment on what Hibaaq said, which is really interesting, that I'm always asked in this context if we are giving lectures or seminars in Western capitals. Oh, what can we do to help you, Saudi women? And this question comes from NGOs in the West. So feminist women group in the West itself, whether it's in London, Washington. I say to them, please do not help us. We do not need your help. And they say, oh, so ungrateful you are. I said, no, if you want to help me, first, I don't want to save me from my brother or father. My brother and father are very loving people. They are not oppressing me. What is oppressing me is a system that depends on you in the West to support, on a political system. So you women here in the audience and men, if you want to help women in other parts of the world, not necessarily in the Arab world, campaign your own government and tell them, do not give these dictatorships unconditional, unequivocal support. You need to make your help, your support, your trade, investment, arms sale dependent on these regimes abiding by some kind of international norms, and one of them is the end of discrimination against women, in addition to respecting human rights, etc. This is how you could help. But please do not think that I'm oppressed and I need you to help me. What you can help, the areas you can help in and you are most efficient in is to go to your government, to your local authority, to your elected MP and say to them, when we are discussing arms sale to this regime, please be careful, because these arms are the ones that are used to make women homeless in the Arab world, to make them starve, to kill their children. Also, to end the occupation. The Arab world is the only country in the world, in the Muslim world, which has territories that are occupied. I mean, from Palestinian territories to other areas. It is the only region in the world where, 5 out of 7 countries that the US bomb are in the Arab world. So how do you expect me to talk about the West helping me as a woman when the arms that are sold by Western powers to support these dictators are killing the people that you want to save? You cannot play the game in the West as supporting dictatorship and saving us women.
Zulija, ¿cuál dirías que ha sido el papel? Perdón.
What do you think? We've listened to Madawi talk about the visibility and also about the possibility of speaking out more on Facebook campaigns, but not helping, trying to help from our Western standpoint, while on the other hand, we allow weapons to be sold to dictators. But what do you think has been the role played by women in these transformations of the last 10 years? We've seen them in the streets, yes, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the country, but they've played
clear role, a pivotal role, but they haven't just been playing the game of men. For example, in Egypt, when sometimes they came out for the photos and then went back home. What has been the role played by women, if we can speak generally, of course, because I understand that we may have to go country by country.
Unfortunately, I don't know about all example of activism of women for women rights in the 28 Arab world, but I should say that I traveled in many Arab countries, and each time I visit a country, I'm very surprised because I meet very interesting people, men and women actually, that they are trying to make change and of course putting the woman right in the middle of the concern. I'm just trying now, just like without revision, I didn't take a note, but for example, in Morocco, we have a very important sociologue called Fatemah Mernissi. And you know what? I just get to know her when I get in Morocco. When I went to Morocco, when I was already 34, you know, and I was asking myself how I come that I didn't get to her literature, to her writing, to her text, because I don't know if you agree, because you know her studies, but actually she really covered all this question, you know, and she really given analysis about feminism inside the Arab world, not on a vision of the Western. And this is very important for us because as a young woman from, I'm not young that much, but when I was young, the feminism I heard about, what I get to learn about, it was feminism from the Western world, you know, like Yourcenar or, you know, all the famous writing, The Second Sex, and so. So this is first thing that I encourage the young people from the Arab world just to do some research, and they will find many answers already about those questions. And today we have a lot of activists in Algeria with Tamsali, with I'm thinking about Asma Marabat, for example, when she's Muslim, woman, and she revendique, she really put this on as an important thing, that now she's given in a new lecture of the Quran through the question of the woman rights. And I'm telling you, she's bothering a lot of people. But this is, I mean, I can give you many examples, but I feel like, of course, I joined Madawi about that in the Western world, we don't give space to these people. We do prefer to give space of speech to other actors that, for me, they are not the good example. And definitely in the Arab world, there are many examples. And of course, actually, I'm not academic. I will let Madawi to validate that. But we end up with the colonization like 15 years ago. You know, it's not that much in the history of social, in the history of society. And yes, I witness mutation, social mutation, and I think this is I am. Actually, I really, it's very important for me to see that on the positive way. We have really too many steps to cross, and we need time, and we have to deal with many issues. And something else I want to say too is that we should not forget that we have many references to comment dire, to have to build a modern society in our culture, in our Muslim Arab culture. We have, I mean, we just need to do kind of revision, you know, of our history, and we will find that we, comment dire, les anciens ancestors gave us some comment dire, tips, you know. So yeah, that's what I can say.
Hibaaq, me gustaría saber en qué o cuáles deberían ser los puntos, las actitudes que deberían cambiarse desde Occidente.
I would like to know what the attitude, approach changes should be in the West. What do you think should be the West's approach to the subject? One of the things you said was that perhaps there could be a lack of involvement or access of women to peace processes that we have nevertheless seen in some countries of sub-Saharan Africa, such as Liberia or Democratic Republic of Congo or Rwanda, where women are clearly participating in the peace processes, or where it is even said that it is women who are driving the change. Probably much of the same is probably happening already in the Arab world, but none of that information is reaching us. How do you think we should change how the West approaches these matters, and how we can help to make the participation of women greater in peace processes? One thing that's always struck me, and here I of course have to intone the West's mea culpas, NGOs, or the European Union or the United Nations, when they go to a mission on the ground, when you see that they're speaking to the counterpart who is normally male, and you ask for changes versus with regard to women, all of those who are seated on the other side of on the western side of the table are men to begin with. That would be a wrong starting point, right? If there were women talking to the men on the other side of the table demanding changes, because if not, the first thing they can say is, what are you talking about if you were all men seated at the side of the table? What situations do you think should change? For example, Western women's greater participation in these claims, and if they are necessary. It's not a debate that I think we need to go into, but what should change in the West's approach to the Arab world?
Wow. I hope I understood everything. Well, the most important, when people say, what can we do? You know, how can we help? It's like, whatever you do, please don't help. Because the most important thing is the issues should be issues of the community and should come from the people. They should prioritize what the issue is. The issue might not be reproductive right, you know, which I strongly support, but it might not be. It might not be in the middle of Yemen where somebody is coming, instead of saying, well, let's stop the war and let's, you know, stop the weapons flow into Yemen. You know, people want to talk about child marriage. Or you go to Somalia and, you know, Western NGOs want to talk about FGM in the middle of war. So it doesn't mean these issues are less important, but the most important thing is you have to live first and stop the war. Because what war has done, it has reversed all the gains that women have gained, you know, in the past. So one, that you should know that you don't know, that people who live in the country know. And that's exactly what should be supported. It's their ideas and their priorities. not your priorities and not your agenda. So that is number one. Number two, I do believe Dr. Madawi said, of course, there is visibility. There are a lot, things have changed. The fact that women are engaged and very political and articulate and, and fighting for their rights, fighting for new constitutions, fighting for implementation. It used to be in many countries that if you talk like that or if you, gather together for a cause, it was criminal. It was criminalized. So that fear is no longer there. But it doesn't mean the challenge is less, except the people now are willing to give that price. So if there are 19 articles in Egypt in the new constitution, it was because women have fought for it. And now the idea, if it's the 87 women in the parliament in Egypt for the first time, it was because women fought. Now, it doesn't mean the 87 women became feminists and they want to support women's rights. No, it might not, because what happens a lot of times, there is woman, there is woman. There are those who are very synthesized and conscious of their, that they are women and they are there to push for women's rights. And there are others who basically take the party line or the government line and feel that they have a lot to lose if they are with the people and community, and they will be better off and will be appointed to important position if they are with the government. So it doesn't mean that every woman who is really there, who came through, women's agenda, is going to support women. So yes, changes have happened. There are challenges. People are still engaged and want to bring in change. What can the West do? Again, just know that you really don't know, because you are most of the time, if you look at governments, talk to governments regardless of anything. Governments, for example, who, let's say, the Scandinavian governments are, for example, let's say, there is peace and loving peace or whatever it is. But they are, Sweden is the #1 country that is selling weapons. Okay, so in one door, you cannot say, okay, there is going to be negotiations for peace for Syria. The other door, you cannot be selling weapons. What can the Europeans do? For heaven's sakes, if you look at this whole issue of migration, it's so Eurocentric. All they want, the EU is like, okay, we don't really want this black and brown people here, those Muslims, they're going to change our, and you really are buying that narrative of the neocons, what do you call them, of the populist movements, which means, what at any level, keep those brown people and black people at bay, whatever costs. And what that means is the EU actually negotiated with Libya that has 3 different governments, so that these migrants would not cross over to Europe. So what it is so Eurocentric, what they care about is the safety and security of Europe first, and this. So again, what can they do? I think you are very lucky to have, a chance to elect people who actually have better policies, because what you need to understand is it's not a charity. Politics is not a charity. You have to really think, okay, in the long term, this is really about me and my security and my children. Those migrants, for example, the majority of Syrians are in Syria. The majority of those people who are of Syrians fleeing want to stay at the borders near Syria, so that anytime there's a chance they can go back. So don't assume every single person really is running to come to Europe. Absolutely not. And some of them actually in Germany went back. So there's nothing like home at the end of the day. So this whole idea of this greedy black and Arab Muslim people coming to Europe to take our job, that does not fit. So what can you do? Correct the narrative. Elect people who really are going, because you're not doing it for me, you're doing it for yourself. Question where your tax money is going, and make sure that you are not part of, because every cent that was taken from you, if it went into weapons, you are also part of the problem of killing the children. And I know it's terrible, I was called all kinds of names because I said that, but that's the truth. Because your tax money, your taxpayers, if your tax money went to buy weapons for Syria or warlords in Somalia, then you are part of it. So question, for your long term, it's good. So again, what can Europe go? I mean, you asked the wrong question. Okay, so the point is, you just have to be very strategic of who you are talking to and the long term, because what's happening now is you also asked about the missions, who do they talk to? Well, the fact of the matter is the UN, high-level mission goes, they just talk to the counterparts and they talk to people who are already pre-selected for them. So it's not as if they're going to the villages and all of that. So if you talk about, for example, SDGs and all of these good things, and we already said, like the Palestinians said, there is no development in occupation, but there's not going to be any development, if there is no peace either. So the point is talking to the communities and finding a way where all these, programs are trickling down to the community directly without any government or any middle people. You said something else. Okay, I know you asked something. Change, what did I missions? You said something like how can we change our way of doing things, and just I think it's very complicated. It's not simple, because governments would do whatever is in their interest. But I think you can learn one or two things from the Middle East: protesting, having your own Tahrir squares and change squares, and being occupied, not because you're doing anybody a favor, but you are thinking about your future. And the one thing that we have to understand is things can be better. They don't have to be the way they are. And there is an interdependence economically, politically, and socially. So obsessing about Islam this and Islam that, whether you like it or not, Muslims will always be Muslims and nothing would ever change. My mother will be putting the hijab and nothing would ever change. So this whole obsession about associating hijab with oppression it's so naive and so ridiculous, because if I see my mother sitting somewhere without her hijab, I will be in shock. Yeah. I would never put on hijab, but if I see my mother, and if I also see her standing in front of the house without any of her, I will still be more shocked, and I'm supposed to be very progressive and all that. So those things would be that way. But the issue here is not whether you put hijab, niqab, or whatever. It's never taking away the freedom of woman, whether she wants to put it in. That's what my thing is, making her choice, the choice to wear what she wants, to do what she wants, and the choice to her body. Which again, you also have a major problem in Europe for a woman to choose, the right to her body and reproductive rights. Anyway.
Yeah, the short comment is basically about, if we're talking about the West, where do you get your knowledge about women in the Arab world? We can't assume that we are all academics. You mentioned Fatemah Mernissi. Okay, she is in a niche. I teach her books in my class, but only my students will know. But the wider world will probably get their knowledge from the media. And unfortunately, I can't comment on Spanish media because I don't speak Spanish, although I published some translations. Somebody translated in Spanish media. But I hope amongst the audience, there are journalists. And basically, you have made the step to know more about the Arab world and the Arab women by coming today. And we have to thank Casa Árabe for giving us this opportunity to talk to you and you talk to us, and also maybe listen to a different kind of discourse about women. So you had 3 of us here, and we hope that we can hear from you now about any questions, and we're happy to answer them.